As an amp designer and builder, there are few things more irritating than when someone does everything exactly wrong and gets away with it. In this case, we've got a copy of a 6G6-B Bassman, blonde Bassman. And while the overall build quality is kind of meh, kind of like a Weber kit, it does have Mercury magnetic transformers. It has the blue Sozos that look so pretty on the gear page. It's got all half-watt carbon comps. It's got some very incorrect choices long-term, but in the short term, it mostly sounds okay and is relatively quiet, despite the theoretical ground loops, because the grounding is terrible. Everything is redundant and noisy things are tied to quiet things. And for some reason, the builder got away with that, and it's irksome to me. But there's some things in here he did not get away with, and some things that need to be changed while the amp is on the bench so the owner has long-term reliability. Number one, these caps here, these silver micas, are the generics that just say SM as opposed to saying CME. The SM caps are about 40 cents and the good ones are about $2. And you're not buying a name brand or a cachet of spending $2 on one of those caps. The issue is that these silver micas that just say SM, the generic ones, they begin to leak. It's just real common, and I and many builders I know have stopped using them because we've had too many issues with them. So these need to be replaced. I'll be replacing them with 1 kilovolt ceramic discs, much more similar to what was in this amp originally from the factory. If you go back to, say, a 62 Bassman, and the builder put a 10 picofarad here where Fender spec'd out 100 picofarad. That can make a difference. The amp is lacking grid stoppers. The original was lacking grid stoppers. This guy was just following the diagram. This amp sounds better and will be better sounding in more electrical environments with grid stoppers. And he used the 1 watt carbon film screen grid resistors. The original had 1 watt carbon composite. 1 watt is just barely enough. Fender kind of got away with it, though you see them baked a lot. These need to be changed out. I'm going to put in some 3 watts like I do on all the Fenders for long-term reliability. Now, the 2 places where he did not get away with just copying without knowing what he was doing, this amp has got a Mercury magnetics output transformer with a 4 ohm, 8 ohm, and 16 ohm tap. And the original Bassman only had the 4 ohm tap on its transformer. And the schematic has a connection from the 4 ohm tap of that transformer through a 56K resistor to the phase inverter. That's the negative feedback circuit. This builder has a 56K, but connected that to the 8 ohm tap. So this amp had twice as much negative feedback as it is supposed to have, which made the amp sound both anemic, and there was some severe blocking distortion happening. It is possible to have too much negative feedback, and the amp becomes unstable. This amp was unstable. I moved that, and now we're at a much better place. Except the tubes are biased ice cold. He has the stock setup here in the bias supply. He's got a 50 volt 25 microfarad cap in parallel with a 27K resistor. There are 2 main issues with that. With that 27K resistor, these 6L6s with 120 volts coming from the wall are biased at about 23%. About half is what they need to be. I could replace just that 1 resistor with maybe a 15K, but I think it'd be better to install either a small trim pot on that bias board, or, given that we have the space here, an adjustable chassis mounted 10K pot like you'd find on a deluxe reverb. The other issue is he used a 50 volt cap just like the original. Well, this bias supply has got negative 53 volts on it. That's 3 volts higher than the tolerance of the rating of the cap. You really want a cap to have at least double the voltage rating for the actual voltage found in circuit. So that 50 volt cap needs to go away and a 100 volt cap needs to come in place, because I would not trust this capacitor to keep working over voltage. And the other issue with this amp that needs to get changed out actually makes this amp illegal to sell. This amp should not have been sold to anyone. It's okay if you want to do this in a build for yourself, but as soon as you sell it to someone, you're making yourself liable. Two things are wrong with this to make it illegal. Number one, the AC safety ground is shorter than the hot and neutral. If you're not using an IEC cable, IEC receptacle, if you have a hardwired physical cable with a cable retainer like this in most old Fenders, then by law, the ground must be longer than the hot and neutral, so that if that were to come loose, that cable were to pull out, the hot or neutral would break off before the ground, and at which point the ground would still be there. If that hot touches chassis, it would ground out and blow a fuse, as opposed to the ground breaking off, then the hot breaking off, the hot touching chassis, the chassis becomes live, and therefore if you're playing guitar at the time, your strings have 120 volts. So this is a safety code violation. The other is that, like Fender did back in the day, they fuse the neutral rather than fusing the hot. Another thing that's illegal to do these days. So if you're going to be selling amps to humans, you either need to change to conform with safety codes, or you need to put on your business that I am a sociopath. I assume he's a sociopath, otherwise he's just terribly inept. That's a bit harsh. I'm not going to bust out who built this amp, because I have the sense it's a one-man guy, maybe done on his kitchen table as for fun, selling it to a few people. Nothing about this screams professional setup. I don't think a lot of people are going to be endangered by this particular builder's amps. And if anyone recognizes this amp and says, oh shit, that's Bobby's amp or whatever, let Bobby know, check this out, make these changes. You cannot use a 50 volt cap if you have 54 volts there, 53 volts. You cannot use the 1962 resistor value and expect amps to bias correctly with 2021 wall voltages. These 1 watt screen grid resistors really need to be at least 2 watts. 3 watts is better. And these SM labeled caps fail a lot. If they haven't failed for you, they haven't failed yet. The ground and the ground bus and everything being redundant like this is horrible. This amp is low enough gain that you're getting away with it. But if you tried to build a Marshall like this, it would fall apart. And I will say honestly that when I play this amp at higher gains, it's not as sweet sounding as it would be if all the grounds were perfect. Bad grounding does not just result in a hum or buzz. It also affects the way notes interact with each other and sustain. Eddy currents are real. It's a really long subject. Anyway, I'm going to contact the owner of this amp and let him know the things that have to be changed, and see if he wants me to redo all of the grounding to make this amp sound optimal. But that's kind of getting into the making it perfect thing. And before we make it perfect, we have to make it good. So I'll redo the mains wiring. I'll make changes to the bias. I've already moved the negative feedback tap from the 8 ohm to the 4 ohm, so the amp's behaving as it was designed as far as the phase inverter and output tubes and transformer. I'm going to replace those ceramic disc caps, those silver mica caps with good ceramic discs. And if the owner is interested, I'll redo all the grounding, including things like the old chestnut of making grounds to chassis through transformer mounting hardware, because that always in time works loose, especially with a thin chassis like this compared to what Fender was using in the 60s. Anyway, that's enough nitpicking. I think the owner will see this. He and I will then have a conversation. It's just discouraging when people are told again and again, anyone can build an app. And then you get anyone building an app, and it's harder for the guys, those of us who really know what we're doing, to stand out, because if you look at this as described on paper, this is the same kind of thing I would build. If you won't even know the differences unless you do this for a living. So these kit builds are bothersome, not because I'm losing money, but because it devalues my knowledge. It devalues the craft. It slights the skill, and I don't like that.